I am 83 years old now, and my hands tremble when I hold this pen. The doctor says it is just age, but I know better. Some tremors come not from bones, but from memories, memories that never truly rest. When people visit me at the retirement home, they often see the framed certificates on my wall. Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, Teacher of the Year, 1978. Outstanding Educator, 1985. They smile politely and say I must have loved teaching children. And I did. But there is one child, one boy, whose face never left me. Not in all these years. Not even when sleep comes heavy and slow. His name was Malik Johnson. And he was the best student I ever had. Also the most ignored. All because he was black. It was the autumn of 1969 when I first met Malik. I remember the day clearly because the leaves outside Maplewood Elementary were turning bright orange, and the air smelled like chalk dust and rain. I was 26 then, young, nervous, eager to prove myself. My classroom had freshly polished wooden desks, a blackboard that squeaked every time I wrote on it, and rows of eager faces waiting to begin the school year. Well, almost eager. That year, our school had accepted its first group of black students after the district was forced to integrate. Some parents protested. Others whispered. A few withdrew their children entirely. I told myself I was different. That I believed in fairness. That I would treat every child the same. But life has a cruel way of showing us the difference between belief and courage. Malik walked into my classroom 10 minutes late on the first day. Not because he wanted to be. Because no one had told him where room 12 was. I remember how he stood in the doorway, small, thin, wearing a neatly pressed shirt that looked slightly too big for him. His hair was cut short, and he held a stack of books tightly against his chest, like armor. The room went silent. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Some curious, some confused, some already filled with something uglier. I forced a smile. Yes, I said. He cleared his throat. His voice was soft but steady. Ma'am, is this room 12? Yes, I replied. You must be Malik Johnson. A few children shifted in their seats. One boy in the back whispered something, and another snickered. I felt heat rise to my face, but I did not correct them. That was my first failure. Take the empty desk in the back, I told him. Not the front. Not the middle. The back. Where the light barely reached. Where students were easiest to forget. Even now, remembering that moment makes my chest tighten. Because sometimes injustice doesn't begin with shouting or hatred. Sometimes it begins with something small. A seat in the wrong place. Malik did not speak much during those first weeks. But he listened. Oh, how he listened. While other students tapped pencils or whispered, Malik sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the board. When I asked questions, his hand rose. Not halfway, not timidly, but straight and steady like a flagpole. At first, I ignored him. Not intentionally, I told myself. Just habit. When you spend years teaching classrooms filled with children who look alike, who share the same backgrounds, your eyes learn patterns. And Malik was not part of that pattern. One morning, I asked the class, "Who can tell me the capital of Kansas?" Hands shot up across the room. I picked Susan Miller. Bright ribbons in her hair, always smiling. "Topeka," she said confidently. "Correct," I replied. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Malik lower his hand slowly. Later that day, I handed out a spelling test. The results came back the next morning. Susan scored 92. Thomas Reed scored 88. Mary Collins scored 95. Malik Johnson scored 100. Perfect. Not a single mistake. I stared at his paper longer than necessary. His handwriting was neat, careful, deliberate, as if every letter mattered. I remember thinking, lucky guess. That was my second failure. Weeks passed, then months, and the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every math test, 100. Every spelling test, 100. Reading comprehension, flawless. History quizzes, precise, detailed, thoughtful. Yet something strange happened. When group activities began, children avoided him. When partners were assigned, groans filled the room if his name was mentioned. One afternoon, I overheard a girl whisper, "My mama says we shouldn't sit too close." I froze. But I said nothing. That was my third failure. The day everything changed began like any other. Rain tapped gently against the classroom windows, turning the world outside gray and blurry. Inside, the smell of wet coats filled the room. I wrote a long division problem on the board. Who would like to solve this? Hands went up. As always, Malik's hand rose first. Steady. Certain. Waiting. I hesitated. Then, almost without thinking, I called on Thomas instead. Thomas walked to the board, chalk trembling in his hand. He struggled. Numbers slid crooked across the board like falling dominoes. 5 minutes passed. Whispers spread. Giggles followed. Thomas erased and tried again. Still wrong. I felt the class growing restless. And then, a voice behind me spoke. Soft. Careful. Ma'am, may I try? I turned. Malik was standing now. Not raising his hand. Standing. The room grew silent. I hesitated again. But something in his eyes, steady, patient, unafraid, made me step aside. Go ahead, I said. He walked to the board slowly, took the chalk, and in less than 30 seconds, solved the entire problem. Perfectly. Every step correct. Every number clean and precise. The room went silent. Not whispering. Not giggling. Just silent. I stared at the board, then at him. How did you learn that? I asked. He shrugged slightly. My daddy teaches me at night, he said. That was the moment I realized something I should have known all along. Malik wasn't lucky. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't just good. He was brilliant. But brilliance alone does not protect a child from cruelty. The first time I saw it happen was during recess. I was standing near the doorway, watching children run across the muddy playground. Laughter filled the air. Except in one corner. Malik stood alone near the fence, holding a red rubber ball. He bounced it once. Twice. Then he walked toward a group of boys. Can I play? He asked. One boy shook his head. We already got enough players. Another added. Go play somewhere else. Malik nodded quietly. He didn't argue. Didn't shout. Didn't cry. He simply walked back to the fence and kept bouncing the ball alone. That image still lives in my mind like a photograph burned into film. A brilliant child. Standing alone. Ignored not for what he lacked, but for what others feared. That afternoon, I called him to my desk after class. He approached slowly, clutching his books. Yes, ma'am. I looked at him for a long moment before speaking. You're doing very well in class, Malik, I said. Thank you, ma'am. Do you enjoy school? He paused. Just for a second. Then he nodded. Yes, ma'am. But I saw it. That tiny hesitation. That brief flicker of truth. And deep inside, something shifted in me. Not yet courage. Not yet action. Just awareness. The first crack in a wall I didn't know I had built. If I had been braver then, perhaps things would have changed sooner. If I had spoken louder, maybe he would not have felt so alone. But courage, I learned, does not arrive all at once. It grows slowly, painfully, like a seed pushing through hard soil. And at the time, I was still learning how to see. I did not know it then, but the real test was coming. Not for Malik. For me. And when that moment arrived, I would have to decide whether I was truly the teacher I believed myself to be, or just another adult who looked away. By the time winter arrived that year, I had begun to notice things I once ignored. Not because the world had changed, but because I had finally started seeing it. The snow fell thick over Maplewood Elementary, covering the playground in a white blanket so bright it hurt the eyes. Children pressed their noses against the classroom windows, hoping recess would still happen. Inside, the classroom felt warmer than usual. Not from the heater, but from the growing tension I could no longer pretend wasn't there. Malik still sat in the back. Still raised his hand. Still gave perfect answers when I finally called on him. But something about him had changed. He spoke less. Smiled less. And when the other children laughed, he didn't look toward them anymore. He kept his eyes on his desk, tracing invisible lines with his finger. That was when guilt began settling into my bones. Not loud guilt. Quiet guilt. The kind that sits beside you in silence and refuses to leave. One morning in January, the principal, Mr. Davenport, entered my classroom without knocking. That alone was unusual. He was a tall man with sharp features and hair slicked back so tightly it never moved. His shoes clicked loudly against the wooden floor as he walked between the rows of desks. Children sat up straighter. Even I felt my spine stiffen. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "May I speak with you outside for a moment?" "Of course," I replied. I stepped into the hallway, closing the door gently behind me. The hallway smelled faintly of wax and old paper. Outside the classroom door, the cheerful sounds of children faded into muffled echoes. Mr. Davenport folded his hands behind his back. "I've been reviewing academic reports," he began. "One student in your class has drawn attention." My heart skipped. "Yes, sir? Malik Johnson." The way he said the name felt heavy, careful, measured. "What about him?" I asked. "He has the highest scores in the entire 5th grade, Mr. Davenport said. I felt a flicker of pride. "Yes, sir. He's very capable." Mr. Davenport tilted his head slightly. "Capable, yes. But also unusual." That word made my stomach tighten. "Unusual how?" He lowered his voice. "There have been concerns from parents." Of course there had been. There always are, I said carefully. He gave me a look that made it clear he did not appreciate humor. "Some parents feel uncomfortable," he continued. "They believe their children are being overshadowed." Overshadowed. By a child who sat alone at recess. By a child no one chose as a partner. "He's earned his grades," I said firmly. Mr. Davenport studied me closely. "Be that as it may, Mrs. Whitmore, it might be best to ensure attention is distributed appropriately." I felt heat rise in my chest. "What exactly are you suggesting?" He smiled slightly. "Simply that we avoid placing too much focus on one student." One student. Not his name. Not his humanity. Just one student. And in that moment, something inside me shifted again. This time it was not guilt. It was anger. Small. But alive. That afternoon, I announced something that would change everything. "Class," I said, standing at the front of the room. "Next month we will be holding the annual academic fair." Excited murmurs filled the room. Each year, students created projects to present to teachers, parents, and school officials. Science experiments, history displays, math demonstrations. Anything that showed learning and creativity. And, I continued, one student will be selected to represent our class in the district competition. Gasps. Whispers. Hope. I watched their faces carefully. Susan looked thrilled. Thomas leaned forward eagerly. Mary clasped her hands in excitement. And Malik? He simply listened. Quiet. Still. Careful not to hope too loudly. "Projects will be individual," I said. "Everyone will have an equal chance." As I spoke those words, I made a promise to myself. Not to the principal. Not to the parents. To the child sitting in the back row. This time, I would not ignore him. The next few weeks were filled with glue, poster boards, colored pencils, and the constant hum of excitement. Children rushed to share their ideas. "I'm building a volcano," Thomas announced proudly. "I'm doing the solar system," Susan said. "I want to make a model of ancient Egypt," Mary added. One by one, they came to my desk to explain their plans. Except Malik. He waited. Until the line was gone. Until the room grew quiet. Then he approached. "Ma'am," he said softly. "Yes, Malik. I have an idea, but I don't know if it's good enough." I leaned forward. "What is it?" He hesitated, then spoke. "I want to build a machine that can clean dirty water." I blinked. "A machine?" He nodded. "My daddy told me some places don't have clean water. So I thought, maybe I could make something that filters dirt out." I stared at him, stunned. Other children were building volcanoes that erupted baking soda. This boy wanted to solve real-world problems. "That sounds like a very good idea," I said. His eyes widened slightly. "You think so?" "I do." And for the first time, I saw something I had never seen before. Hope. But hope, as I would soon learn, can be dangerous in the wrong environment. 2 days later, while students worked on rough sketches, I overheard a conversation near the supply shelf. Thomas leaned toward Susan. "What's Malik making?" he whispered. "Some weird water thing," Susan replied. Thomas snorted. Bet it doesn't work. Another boy chimed in. My dad says those kids don't invent stuff. I froze. Those kids. I felt my hands curl into fists. For a moment, I considered staying silent. Just like before. Just like always. But then I looked across the room. Malik sat alone, drawing careful diagrams on lined paper. Focused. Serious. Hopeful. And suddenly, silence felt like betrayal. That is enough, I said sharply. The room fell silent. Every head turned toward me. I walked toward the group slowly. In this classroom, I said firmly, we respect each other's ideas. Thomas looked down at his desk. No one here is better than anyone else, I continued. And no one is less. I glanced at Malik. He looked up, eyes wide with surprise. Because he had never heard me defend him before. Not once. Until now. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment I had ignored him. Every time I chose another student. Every time I stayed quiet. Regret has a way of growing louder in the dark. And somewhere between midnight and dawn, I made a decision. If Malik built that project, if he worked as hard as I believed he would, then I would make sure his work was seen. Not hidden. Not minimized. Seen. Even if it meant standing against parents. Even if it meant standing against the principal. Even if it meant standing alone. Because sometimes, the turning point in life does not come when something terrible happens. Sometimes, it comes when you finally decide to do what is right. No matter the cost. But I did not yet know how high that cost would be. And I certainly did not know that the day of the academic fair would change Malik's life. And mine. Forever. The day of the academic fair arrived colder than any morning I could remember. Frost covered the classroom windows like thin white lace, and the hallways buzzed with nervous energy. Parents walked in carrying coats and coffee cups, their voices echoing against the polished floors. I stood at the front of room 12, smoothing my skirt for the third time. My hands were shaking. Not from cold. From fear. Because today, everything would be tested. Not just the students. Me. The classroom had been transformed overnight. Desks were pushed aside, replaced with tables covered in colorful cloth. Posters lined the walls. Cardboard volcanoes, papier-mâché planets, and glitter-covered history boards filled the room. Children moved nervously around their displays, rehearsing explanations under their breath. Thomas adjusted his volcano. Susan straightened tiny foam planets. Mary carefully placed paper pyramids on her Egypt display. And Malik stood beside a simple wooden table near the back wall. Not hidden. Not today. I had moved his project to a place where everyone would see it the moment they entered. That alone had caused whispers earlier that morning. But I did not change it. Not this time. His project was unlike anything else in the room. While the others were bright and decorative, his was careful, thoughtful, precise. 3 clear containers sat in a row. One filled with muddy water. One connected to tubes and layers of sand, charcoal, and cotton. The final container held clean, clear water. Beside it sat a handwritten sign. Water Filtration System, by Malik Johnson. The letters were neat. Perfect. Hopeful. I watched him adjust the tubing one last time. You ready? I asked quietly. He looked up at me. His face was serious, but his hands trembled slightly. Yes, ma'am, he said. Then he hesitated. Do you think people will understand it? That question pierced my heart. Not will it work. Not is it good. But will people understand? I placed my hand gently on his shoulder. They will, I said. And this time, I truly believed it. The first wave of parents entered at 9 o'clock sharp. Their footsteps filled the room. Voices murmured. Eyes scanned the displays. At first, most gathered around the familiar projects. Volcanoes that erupted foam, spinning solar systems, colorful posters filled with facts. But slowly, curiosity began to shift. Toward the back wall. Toward Malik. I watched as the first parent approached his table, a tall man with gray hair and thick glasses. He leaned forward. What's this? He asked. Malik swallowed. Then began. This system filters dirty water into clean water, he explained. The sand removes large particles. The charcoal removes smaller impurities. His voice was steady, clear, confident. The man watched carefully. Does it actually work? He asked. Malik nodded. Yes, sir. Would you like to see? He lifted a small pitcher filled with muddy water. My heart pounded as he poured it into the first container. The liquid moved slowly through the layers. Sand. Charcoal. Kung. Drip. 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 Then, clear water began filling the final container. The man's eyes widened. Well, I'll be. He murmured. And just like that, everything began to change. Soon more parents gathered. Then more. And more. A small crowd formed around Malik's table. Questions came quickly. How did you design this? Where did you learn about filtration? Did you build it yourself? Malik answered each one carefully. My father helped me understand how water moves. I studied diagrams in library books. Yes, ma'am, I built it myself. Pride filled my chest so strongly it almost hurt. Not just pride in him, but pride that I had finally chosen to stand beside him. But not everyone was pleased. Near the doorway, I saw Mr. Davenport speaking quietly with a group of parents. Their faces looked tight, unhappy. I felt the knot in my stomach tighten again, because I knew what was coming. At noon, the judges arrived. 3 adults from the district office, wearing serious expressions and carrying clipboards. They moved slowly from project to project, writing notes, smiling politely, nodding. Then they reached Malik. I held my breath. The lead judge, a woman with silver hair, studied the setup carefully. You built this? She asked. Yes, ma'am, Malik replied. Explain how it works. And he did. Every detail. Every step. Every reason. Not rushed. Not nervous. Just brilliant. When he finished, the judges exchanged glances. The silver-haired woman leaned closer to the clear container. This is remarkable, she said quietly. Remarkable. I felt tears sting my eyes. Because for the first time, someone saw him the way I finally did. But the real moment, the one that changed everything, had not yet come. Because excellence alone does not silence prejudice. Recognition does not erase resistance. And as I would soon learn, victory sometimes requires confrontation. That afternoon, just before the awards were announced, Mr. Davenport approached me. His face was stiff, controlled. Mrs. Whitmore, he said quietly. A word. My heart pounded as I stepped into the hallway. I knew. This was the moment. The one I had feared. The one I could not avoid. And this time, I would not stay silent.